Yo, what's going on, guys? My name is Alex, and holy wow, the Bucks, it's official. They officially lost the series against the Miami Heat in 5, and this is just something that I honestly did not expect at all. This Game 5 was an absolute disgrace from all sides of the Bucks, and I'm going to talk about the coaching because I think the coaching was the biggest problem, but we also need to hold players accountable as well, like Giannis Antetokounmpo. But first, I need to give props to the Miami Heat because I didn't really give them a shot. I had predicted that the Bucks would beat the Heat in 5 games, and obviously it was the complete opposite of what happened. So again, shout out to Jimmy Butler. We all know what he was able to do. He absolutely carried this team on his back. This Miami Heat team is filled with a bunch of G League players and undrafted players, and obviously you have Bam Adebayo and you have some nice savvy veterans like Kevin Love, Kyle Lowry, and stuff like that. But it just wasn't supposed to get to this point. The Heat in the regular season were known as one of the worst offenses in the league, also one of the worst three-point shooting teams in the league, and they completely switched that around. They're now one of the best shooting and just offensive teams in general this postseason to start off. So shout out to the Heat for just absolutely turning it around, because although Jimmy Butler was the leader of that squad, there's no doubt in my mind that if the other players like Gabe Vincent, like Kevin Love, like Kyle Lowry, and even Bam to a certain extent, if those guys are not hitting their shots, because a lot of these games were close. Obviously this game 5 went into overtime, so something had to be the difference, and it was just the people around Jimmy Butler. So shout out to everyone on this team, and shout out to Eric Spoelstra, because just off the top of my head, I mean, he's got to be the best coach in the NBA. And even before this series, I believe that he was one of the better coaches, but I mean, he just completely outcoached Budenholzer in the series, and it's not even close. I thought the Heat did a really good job in guarding Giannis. There were times where they would put Gabe Vincent on Giannis, and it would absolutely bait Giannis into posting him up, because obviously it's Gabe Vincent, so it's like 7 foot against what, like 6'1", 6'2", 6'3", so that's an obvious post up. But because the Heat have Bam Adebayo, who is one of the best defensive players in the league, he's a great roamer as well as a defender. So even if you're posting up Gabe Vincent, you got Bam Adebayo in the shadows right behind him. So it would really just force Giannis into, bulldozing so he'd get a charge. That was a big issue in the playoffs this year for Giannis. Yet again, he constantly got called for charges. And then worst case scenario, they foul Giannis, and he has to shoot free throws, which he just was very scared to do in the series, especially in Game 5, which we'll talk about later. But yeah, just in general, the Heat really forced Giannis to do things that he just isn't accustomed to. They made him a post player, and you would think Giannis is a good post player because of how big he is, but that's just not his game. Despite what people may think, Giannis is not a post player at all. He is literally, and I hate to say this, but he is kind of just like a run and dunk merchant in a way. Obviously, his game is a lot more than just that. But in this series alone, it just showed that a lot of what he was relying on was his ability to go into the paint and try to, lay the ball up or dunk on someone. And the Heat just did a really good job in making sure that didn't happen, closing in on him. They built the wall. They had Bam Adebayo in the shadows. They did a really good job of doubling him in the right spots so that you would pass out to someone else. The Heat just had a master plan against the Bucks, and the Bucks just had no answers for it. And again, a lot of it has to do with Mike Budenholzer, who I think should be fired this season immediately in the next coming days. He needs to be fired for what he did. Let's first start off by saying that Chris Middleton in that third quarter was fantastic and is a big reason why the Bucks had a 16-point lead going into the fourth quarter. But once we got into that fourth quarter, Chris Middleton was an almost no-show, and I think a lot of that has to do with Mike Budenholzer just not putting the ball in his hands and giving him good enough plays for him to get open. Again, I think what a lot of Budenholzer does, at least on the offensive end, is very free-flowing, and I think it's kind of ridiculous too that he constantly thinks that Giannis has to be the pick-and-roll ball handler. I need to see more Chris Middleton, Giannis pick and rolls, but Giannis has to be the roll man. He cannot be the ball handler, and he is a good passer, and he has shown to be a better passer throughout the years. Again, the Heat are just too good. They have such a good defensive game plan against that. Giannis is not going to be able to take advantage of that. He needs to be the roll man in that situation. And again, that is a Budenholzer problem. And as the lead is dwindling down in the fourth, we get to the very end of the play where Jimmy Butler gets that tip-in shot and there's only 0.5 seconds left. I didn't even realize this when it had first happened, but Brook Lopez was not on the court. Why is Brook Lopez not on the court when you're up 2? So obviously a 2 would tie the game, but you obviously don't want 3s because a 3 would win the game. You cannot rule out, even if there's 2 seconds left, you cannot rule out a play where you get someone at the basket and someone tips it in for a quick basket. You cannot rule that out. So there is no way a guy who was a Defensive Player of the Year candidate this year, there's just no way he is not on the court at the time where you need a defensive stop. The closest thing I can compare this mishap to is when Greg Popovich took out Tim Duncan in the finals against the Heat, where Chris Bosh ultimately got that offensive rebound off a LeBron James miss and passed it out to Ray Allen, and the rest was history, as we all know. This is the closest thing I can think of, because there is no way in that scenario Tim Duncan should have gotten off the court because of his defense, and it's the same reason why Brook Lopez should have been on the court. This guy is a great defender, and although I think he does need to be held accountable because in the series he was constantly being played in the drop, that is in part of him, but also the coaching as well. There's just no reason why Brook Lopez should not have been on the court, again, especially if the play was to tip the ball in. And even though they scored the ball, the Bucks had 0.5 seconds left. That means you can catch the ball and shoot it right away. What do the Bucks do? They don't call a timeout, and they inbound the ball and they waste the time. The reason why I have a problem with this is that, yes, the players should know that they have a timeout, but again, the coach needs to be a good game manager. They need to understand the scenario that they're in, and even if the Miami Heat were to score, they needed to have that conversation to say, hey, we need to call a timeout so we can draw a play up. Because they didn't call a timeout, I do not think that it was a conversation that was had. And again, I think that is Mike Budenholzer's fault. You are the coach and you need to set the standard, and you need to be able to tell your players, hey, we got 1 timeout left. No matter what happens, if they score, we're calling a timeout. That didn't happen. And again, the Bucks blew a 16-point lead. The Bucks only made 3 baskets. And if your offense is not going to be making shots and your defense is going to give up 3s, and you're not supposed to be able to do what you're supposed to do, the coach needs to be able to have some sort of advantage in this series to help you out. And Mike Budenholzer absolutely failed them in that 4th quarter. But wait, it gets worse. We get into the OT and it's still back and forth. Again, the Heat won by 2 points. And we get to the very end and the Bucks actually have a shot to tie or win this game. With 8 seconds left, Giannis grabs the rebound. The Bucks have 2 timeouts. They could have called a timeout. They chose not to. Giannis goes up the court. He passes it to Chris Middleton. He passes out to Grayson Allen. He drives. He actually has a decent look at a floater. But he decides that he is going to Euro step to the right and shoot a layup. He airballs it, but guess what? It didn't even count anyway. Even if it went in, it wouldn't have counted. The Bucks did not get a shot up with 8 seconds left and 2 timeouts left to tie or win the game. That is unacceptable. That has to be on the fault of Mike Budenholzer and even the players as well. There is just no way you cannot get a shot up at the very end of a game that if you lose, you're out of the playoffs. That cannot happen. And again, that is everybody's fault. I don't care who it is. Giannis could have called a timeout. Chris Middleton could have called a timeout. Mike Budenholzer could have called a timeout. Anyone could have called a timeout. And it didn't happen. And they had 2. So even if they did call a timeout and they tried to run a play and they couldn't inbound the ball, they could have had another timeout to draw something else up. Again, I just don't understand it. There was just so many times in this game where the Heat were just obviously out-coaching them in terms of how they were defending Giannis and just this Bucks team in general. And there was just no sort of adjustments by Mike Budenholzer to put Giannis in better spots, making him the roller instead of the ball handler in a pick and roll. And there was nothing getting Giannis downhill either. It was just all post-ups or him shooting shots that he just shouldn't be taking. And it also should be said, for Giannis, he was just not aggressive enough. And you could see that because during that tip ball in the 4th quarter, I believe, Giannis had gotten the ball and he was so scared of getting fouled to be sent to the foul line that he almost threw the ball out of bounds. And Chris Middleton had a dolphin dive out of bounds to swat the ball back in. They were so lucky to even get that ball back because, again, Giannis almost threw the ball out of bounds. It was so close. And again, that is a Giannis problem. That's not a Mike Budenholzer problem, but Mike Budenholzer needs to do a better job at getting Giannis downhill. He just couldn't do that. It was all post-ups. The offense was super stagnant. And again, the coaching, the lack of timeouts being called, the lack of just anything being run on the offensive end. Hey man, this is a post video. I just kept thinking about just how bad of a coach Mike Budenholzer is. And I just can't believe that the entire series they also let Drew Holiday just cover one-on-one on Jimmy Butler, and they just never did anything to change that. Like, they never even, I mean, they doubled him like every once in a while, but like, it should have been a consistent basis that Jimmy Butler needs to be doubled and you need to get the ball out of his hands. And again, I understand that the Heat were making all of their threes, but at the end of the day, like, I forget who was it, Spencer Haywood, who was on the NBA TV broadcast for Game 5. Anyone but Jimmy Butler. That's what he was saying. He constantly said it. He said it in the beginning of the game, said it in the fourth quarter. Anyone but Jimmy Butler, the ABJ defense. And it just never happened. And again, that is a Mike Budenholzer problem. Giannis even talks about it. He says he wants to cover him more often. And even though I don't think Giannis is the greatest one-on-one defender, I think giving Jimmy Butler different, defenses and giving him different options on who he has to score on, I think that definitely probably makes things a little bit harder, makes him have to think a little bit more at least. But if you're just constantly throwing Jimmy Butler on him, going one-on-one, and Jimmy Butler took Drew Holiday's lunch money. He is down in the fourth quarter, and he's saying, I own you. Look at the scoreboard, buddy. And Drew Holiday also was just completely shit on the offensive end as well. Drew Holiday got his lunch money taken. And again, to just go back on the defensive coverages, it's just I don't understand why Mike Budenholzer is not sending more help to Jimmy. It just doesn't make sense. And ultimately, that's the reason why the Heat were able to come back down 16 points in the fourth quarter and win this game and ultimately move on. I can't even say anything right now about the Heat and Knicks because that is a series I didn't think was going to happen. I also had the Cavs beating the Knicks, and that just didn't happen. I'll probably have a video about that soon, but thank you guys for listening to my rant. If you did end up enjoying this video, make sure to like and sub. I'm trying to get to 2,000 subs by the end of the year, so it would mean a lot. I'm also going to be posting more videos about the playoffs, so another reason why you should sub and turn on notifications. Why not? Make sure to check out my socials down in the description below and check out the video somewhere on the screen. I don't know what video it is. Yeah.